Hello, my name is Marlene. I'm not sure how to start, but here we go. I often wonder when things changed. When did we stop looking at each other the way we once did? I try to remember, but it's all so blurred. Dean and I have been together for 10 years now. We have 2 beautiful kids, Zoe and Jack, and our golden retriever, Charlie, who's always so excited to see us, no matter how tired we are. It's a full life, a blessed life, really. But it's also monotonous. The passion that once burned between us has faded into the background. We have our routines: wake up, get the kids ready, go to work, pick them up from school, make dinner, watch TV, sleep. Every day is the same, and I can feel the distance between Dean and me growing wider. I love him, of course. I've always loved him. But love isn't enough sometimes, is it? I've tried to spice things up over the years, tried to be the one who brought excitement to our relationship. I've suggested trips, date nights, new experiences, but the spark never quite returns. The physical intimacy becomes less frequent, and when it happens, it's almost like we're just going through the motions. I don't blame Dean for everything. I'm not perfect either. But I need more. I want more. And that's when I proposed the idea of an open relationship. It was late one night, after the kids had gone to bed, and we were sitting on the couch watching a documentary about couples who had opened their marriages. I was curious, so I brought it up casually. "Dean, what do you think about having an open relationship?" I said, trying to sound nonchalant. He looked at me like I was crazy. "What do you mean, like, seeing other people?"
Yeah,
I replied. "Just physically. Nothing serious, just some fun. I don't know, maybe it would help us reconnect in a different way." Dean didn't answer immediately. He sat there, frozen, clearly processing what I had just said. I could see the gears turning in his head, and I didn't know if he was disgusted or intrigued. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I don't know, March. That feels weird. But if you think it would help, I guess we could try it." I was relieved. I had expected him to say no, or worse, to shut me down completely. But his willingness to consider it made me feel liberated. And so, we agreed. It wasn't a decision we made lightly, but it felt like a chance to revitalize something that had gone stale. We set some ground rules. No emotional attachments. Nothing that could disrupt our family life. Just physical connections with other people. For the first few weeks, it felt like a strange experiment. Dean didn't really dive into it the way I did. He was cautious, taking his time to explore this new freedom. As for me, I threw myself into it. I met a couple of men through apps, casual encounters at first. Nothing too serious. Just a way to feel something again, to feel desired, to remind myself that I still had power over my own body. It was thrilling at first. The attention, the flirting, the excitement of being wanted. But then, I met him. His name was Ethan. He was 25, young, fit, full of energy. He had a way of looking at me, like I was the only woman in the room. At first, It was just physical. The chemistry was undeniable. We met at a bar one night, and it felt like something out of a movie. There was an instant connection, and when we kissed, it was electric. I didn't mean for it to happen. I told myself it was just a fling, something to scratch an itch. But the more I saw him, the more I felt something deeper. He made me feel alive again. He listened to me, laughed with me, and his touch was like a spark that woke up parts of me I thought I'd forgotten. It wasn't just the sex. It was the emotional connection that developed. Slowly but surely, I found myself falling for him. I had never planned on this, but it happened. I felt guilty every time I saw Dean after being with Ethan. It was like living a double life, and the weight of it was crushing. I couldn't tell Dean. I knew it would destroy him. But I was becoming addicted to the thrill of my secret life. I told myself I could keep it under control, that I could balance both worlds, but deep down, I knew I was in over my head. And then, one night, Dean confronted me. It's funny how you can think you're being careful, that you can keep a secret hidden. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks, of unraveling no matter how hard you try to hold them together. The evening was supposed to be like any other. Dean and I were just about to go to bed when I tried to quietly sneak in. I thought the kids had long been asleep, and I didn't want them to overhear anything. But Dean was awake, his eyes fixated on his phone, illuminated by the dim light from the lamp on his side of the bed. His expression was unreadable. "Where were you tonight?" he asked. There was no anger in his voice, only a steady calmness, as if he had known all along. I froze. My mind raced. I was out with some friends. I lied, though my voice felt hollow. It wasn't convincing. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could feel his suspicion heavy in the air. Then, he held up his phone. A message from Ethan flashed across the screen. I couldn't deny it. It was Ethan. The man I'd been seeing in secret for weeks, the man who had made me feel alive again, the man who had unintentionally stolen my heart. The reality of it all hit me like a wave. Dean's voice broke the silence. "Is this him?" I didn't respond at first. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I whispered, "Yes. That's him." My heart felt like it was going to stop beating. For a moment, everything was still. Dean didn't react with anger. He didn't yell. Instead, his face crumbled, the hurt pouring out of him like a torrent. I saw the pain in his eyes, and it cut me deeper than I could have imagined. "I'm sorry, Dean," I said, barely able to keep the tears from spilling over. "I didn't mean for it to happen. But I'm falling for him. I never expected it, but I am." Dean took a deep breath, looking at me as if he were trying to find something in my eyes, something he could hold on to. But there was nothing there but regret and shame. "How long?" he asked, his voice trembling. "How long have you been lying to me?" I didn't want to hurt you," I whispered, the words tasting bitter. "I've been seeing him for almost a month now." Dean's silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. He didn't scream, he didn't accuse me. He just sat there, processing. And in that moment, I realized that everything had changed. We were no longer the same people, living the same life. The next few days were a blur of tension and hurt. Dean and I barely spoke. It was as if a thick, invisible wall had been built between us, a wall that neither of us knew how to tear down. I would catch him looking at me from across the room, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and confusion, and it would break me all over again. I tried to comfort him, but the more I reached out, the more he withdrew. It was as if we were both trying to process this devastation in our own ways, but we couldn't find a way to come together. The kids noticed. Zoe asked me why Daddy wasn't talking to me much anymore. Jack just seemed confused, sensing that something was wrong but unable to understand it. I hated this. I hated that my mistakes were affecting our family, our children. That night, after dinner, Dean and I finally sat down to talk. I knew this conversation was inevitable, but I wasn't prepared for the depth of the pain that would come out. "Do you love him?" Dean asked, his voice cracking. He wasn't angry, he was just hurt. I don't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I care about him. More than I should. But I also love you, Dean. I do. I never meant for this to happen. Dean ran his hands through his hair, shaking his head in disbelief. How could you do this to me, Mar? To us? I thought we were happy. I thought we had everything. I never saw this coming. I never saw it either, I said, tears streaming down my face. I didn't want this to happen. But it did. And now I have to face it. Dean stood up, pacing around the living room. His face was a mask of hurt and anger. I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose you, Mar, but I can't keep living like this. I don't know if I can forgive you. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was the harsh reality of our situation. And I didn't know what to say. Time seemed to drag on in a state of limbo. We both tried to go through the motions of family life, taking the kids to school, helping with homework, making meals. But everything felt different. The tension between us was suffocating. I couldn't escape the guilt, and Dean couldn't escape the hurt. I knew I had to make a decision. It felt like I was standing at the edge of two worlds, and whichever path I chose, it would change everything forever. I couldn't keep living this double life. I couldn't keep seeing Ethan, hiding it from Dean. But I also couldn't ignore the feelings I had developed for him. I had to confront myself, and I had to confront Dean. One afternoon, Dean sat me down again. He was quieter this time, but there was an intensity in his gaze that I hadn't seen before. I've been thinking, he began, his voice low but steady. I don't want to lose you, March. But I can't keep pretending like everything's okay, when it's not. We need to figure out if we can move past this. If you want to stay with me, I'm willing to try. But you have to let him go. I don't want to share you anymore. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. It was clear that Dean wasn't going to ask for a divorce. He was giving me a chance to rebuild our marriage, but it came with a price. I had to let go of Ethan. I spent the next few days in turmoil, torn between the two men I loved in different ways. Ethan had awakened something in me that I thought was lost forever, but Dean was my life partner, the father of my children, the man I had built a future with. I knew what I had to do. I ended things with Ethan. It wasn't easy. He was hurt, confused, and angry, but I knew I couldn't keep living the lie. I could feel a part of me slipping away with every
goodbye.
But deep down, I knew I had to choose the life I had with Dean and the kids. I couldn't keep running from the consequences of my choices. Dean and I started going to therapy. It wasn't a quick fix. We both had a lot of pain to process. I had betrayed his trust, and he was trying to figure out how to trust me again. Every day felt like an uphill battle. There were moments when we fought, moments when the anger and the resentment bubbled up to the surface, but we kept trying. We took small steps, date nights, heartfelt conversations, therapy sessions. The road was long, and there were days when I wasn't sure if we would make it. But there were also moments of tenderness, of remembering why we had fallen in love in the first place. We had to rebuild. Our foundation was cracked, but it wasn't beyond repair. We just had to be willing to put in the work. It's strange how time can heal some wounds and yet leave others raw. Dean and I are still here, still trying, but it's not easy. Every day feels like a step forward and a step back. The love is still there, but it's like we're rebuilding a house that was torn down by a storm. We've got the foundation, but everything else, trust, communication, intimacy, needs to be put together again, piece by piece. I remember the first time we kissed after everything fell apart. It was awkward, tentative. We were standing by the door, and I'd just come back from therapy. Dean was waiting for me, his face tired but gentle. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of what had happened between us, but also something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. "I've missed you," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used to saying those words in a long time. I wanted to say I'd missed him too, but it felt like too much to admit. So instead, I took a step closer. My heart was pounding, unsure, but something told me I had to try. When our lips met, it wasn't the passionate kiss we used to share. It was softer, gentler, full of apologies and unspoken words. There was something in that kiss that felt like a first step toward healing, toward something new. But it didn't erase what had happened. It didn't take away the scars. We pulled away, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. But in the silence, I felt the weight of everything, the hurt, the betrayal, the long nights where we lay in bed, not speaking. It wasn't gone. But we were trying, and that had to count for something. A few weeks later, we took a weekend trip with the kids. A small getaway, nothing extravagant, but I thought it might help. We were still adjusting, still figuring out how to be around each other without the cloud of betrayal hanging over us. I thought if we could get away from our routine, away from the house where so many painful memories had been made, maybe we could breathe again. The kids were excited, running around in the hotel room, playing on their phones, and laughing. I watched them, feeling a pang of guilt. They didn't deserve any of this. They didn't ask for this mess that I had created. I looked at Dean, sitting on the bed, reading his phone. He was trying, and that was all I could ask for. But his silence still hung between us, unspoken, thick. We took a walk through the park later that afternoon. The crisp air felt refreshing, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like we were just another couple. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. I wanted to tell him everything, the doubts, the guilt, the love I still had for him, the fear that I might lose him forever. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I held his hand, feeling the warmth of his fingers against mine, and I just allowed myself to feel that connection again. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, I wanted to believe we could find our way back. When we got back to the hotel, the kids were already in bed. Dean and I sat on the balcony, sipping wine, the night sky stretching out before us. The quiet of the evening felt like an invitation for a conversation we had been avoiding. He looked at me, his gaze intense. "Marlene," he said softly, "I'm trying. I really am. But I need to know, do you still want this? Us? Do you still want me?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how to answer. The truth was messy, tangled up with my feelings for Ethan, my shame, my hopes for the future, and my love for Dean. I had to face it. I had to admit it, not just to him, but to myself. "I do," I said, my voice shaking. "I want this. I want us. But I don't know how to make it work, Dean. I don't know how to go back to the way things were. And I don't want to pretend like everything's okay, when it's not." He looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "I don't want to go back to the way things were either," he said quietly. "I don't think we can. But I'm willing to try. I love you, March. I love our family, and I'm willing to fight for it." Tears welled up in my eyes. He didn't know how hard this was for me, how much I was still carrying inside. But hearing him say that, it meant something. It meant everything. He was offering me a chance to rebuild, to forgive myself, and to try again. And that wasn't something I could take for granted. "I love you too," I whispered. I don't know if I deserve your love after everything I've done." "You do," he said firmly. "You're my wife, and I believe in us. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep trying." And so we did. The weeks that followed were full of difficult conversations. We spent hours talking about what had happened, what went wrong, and how we could move forward. Sometimes, the pain was almost too much to bear. I had broken his trust, and that wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. But there were small victories, too. A quiet night in, just the two of us, no distractions. A laugh over something silly. Holding hands during a family outing. Every little moment felt like a piece of the puzzle falling back into place. But the hardest part of it all was the realization that I couldn't erase my past. I couldn't undo the choices I had made. I had to live with the consequences. And so did Dean. We were both carrying the weight of what had happened, but we were doing it together. I still missed Ethan, in a way I couldn't fully explain. I missed how he made me feel, how he gave me something that had been missing for so long. But I knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. I had chosen Dean, chosen my family. And if I wanted to honor that choice, I had to let go of the other world I had created. It wasn't an easy decision. And it wasn't a clean one. There were moments when I felt like I was suffocating, moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But then I'd look at Dean, look at the kids, and realized that love is messy. Relationships are messy, but they are worth fighting for. We weren't the same people we were before. We couldn't be. But in a way, I think that was the point. We were rebuilding, not just our marriage, but ourselves. And we were doing it together, as a family. One evening, after dinner, Dean and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, and I felt something stir inside me. Something small but real. Dean turned to me, his eyes soft. "I know it's not easy, March. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. "I'm here too," I said quietly, my hand resting gently on his arm. "I want this. I want us." And maybe that's all we needed to know, that, despite everything, we were still here, still willing to try. Maybe, just maybe, love was worth the fight after all. The road ahead would be long, and we both knew it. But for the first time, we were walking it together, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. And in that, there was hope.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gabby's cheating stories. See you on the next one.